Not a procedural vote, not a preliminary reading. The full chamber motion, live on the galactic record, 412 species watching the tally climb, and Earth's seat was empty because nobody had told me it was today. They moved the session up by 6 hours. No notification. No amended agenda sent to my terminal. I found out from Priya, my aide, who found out from a Pelhari cleaning attendant, who overheard 2 Verk staffers in a corridor saying the words, "Before the human arrives." I arrived anyway. The chamber of the galactic conclave seats delegates in concentric rings, the older species closer to the center, the newer ones farther out. Earth sits in the 4th ring. Not the outermost, we have been around long enough for that small mercy, but far enough that when I walked through the main entrance and every head, every eye cluster, every sensory appendage in that room oriented toward me, I felt the distance like a physical measurement. I did not run to my seat. I walked. My thermos was in my left hand. Ethiopian coffee, ground that morning, the only thing on 6-star systems I trust to taste like itself. My credentials card was in my right. I set both on the desk, sat down, and pulled up the live session feed on my screen. Delegate Sarath of the Verk Dominion was at the podium. He is not a large creature by galactic standards. 4 arms, a broad flat face, a voice that sounds like gravel being rinsed in a drain. He does not use theatrical pauses or dramatic inflections. That is what makes him so precise. He simply states. He moves from point to point the way a surgeon moves from incision to incision. No excess, no hesitation, no performance. He was on count 7 of 19 when I sat down. Each count was a violation of the HFY Accords, the foundational trade and conduct agreement that Earth signed 11 years ago when we first earned full conclave membership. Count 7 was the unauthorized relay installation in the Durin corridor. Count 8 was the licensing dispute with the Morrow Collective. Count 9, 10, 11. I kept my eyes on the screen and my hands flat on the desk, and I did not look around the chamber because I already knew what I would see. Attention, the focused, unanimous kind. Not at Earth's seat. At me. There is a particular flavor of humiliation that has nothing to do with guilt. It lives in the space between what you know you did and what a room full of witnesses has decided it means. I know that flavor. I have known it since I was 9 years old, sitting in a municipal government office in a city that no longer exists, listening to an official read my family's debt register, allowed into a room where 30 strangers were waiting for their own appointments and could hear every word. The official had a flat, clean voice too. No drama, just facts moving in a line. I set my thermos down very carefully. The cap had left a ring of condensation on the desk surface. I watched that ring. The way it was already starting to dry at the edges, holding its shape only in the wet middle. I watched it because it was there and it was small and it asked nothing of me. Sarath reached count 11 and paused. 3 seconds, translator lag. I was 9 years old and the room was listening, and my mother was sitting beside me not breathing. Then I was 38 and the room had 412 species in it, and I was the only human alive who had learned their languages without a translator node. Because I decided at 22 that I would never again be in a room where I did not understand what was being said about me. I picked up my stylus. I started taking notes. Not defensive notes, not the frantic kind. The forensic kind, the kind where you write down every word because you already know you will need it later, and writing it down keeps your hands from doing something your career cannot survive. The motion read as follows. Earth, as a full signatory of the HFY Accords, had committed 19 documented violations across 8 years. The violations ranged from minor procedural breaches to 3 significant material infractions. The Verk Dominion, acting under Article 44 of the Accords, was formally requesting a public censure, a 2-year trade suspension, and the removal of Earth's voting rights on conclave security matters for a period of no less than 5 years. Sareth presented each count with holographic documentation, survey data, communication logs, time-stamped records the Dominion had spent, as I later confirmed, 11 years gathering. They had not rushed this. They had built it the way a careful person builds a case they intend to be permanent. When he finished, he returned to his seat without looking at me. The chamber voted. 388 in favor, 24 opposed. I wrote that number down too, not the 388, the 24. I did not know their names yet. I did not know why they voted the way they did. But 24 species, in a chamber where opposing the Verk Dominion on a procedural motion costs you trade favors and political goodwill you spend years rebuilding, had voted with Earth. Not for Earth. I was not naive enough to think it was loyalty, but against the motion, against something in it that they found wrong enough to register publicly. That particular flavor of wrong, I thought, has a reason behind it. The session closed. The gavel, a conclave tradition borrowed from human parliamentary procedure, one of the small ironies of galactic diplomacy, came down, and 388 species went back to their conversations and their agendas and their sense that the matter was resolved. Priya appeared at my elbow. She is 26, sharp, and currently the exact color of someone who has not slept and has also recently received catastrophic news. She held her tablet with both hands like it might escape. "The feeds are already running it," she said. "I know. They're calling it. The Verk press office is calling it." I read it. She stopped, looked at me. "What do we do?" I capped my thermos, picked up my notes, stood. "We read everything we signed," I said. She followed me out. Behind us, the chamber was already emptying, the hum of 412 species returning to their routines, their certainty that the human delegate had just been reduced to a footnote in the session record. In the corridor, the galactic feed screens were running the vote tally on a loop. My face was on 3 of them, the photo they always use, the formal credentials portrait where I look like I am calculating something at the expense of whoever took the picture. Under it, in 6 languages I can read without assistance, variations on the same phrase. Earth-centered diminished. One feed, in the tonal language of the Keth Collective, used a word that translates most directly as the moment of permanent smallness. I looked at it for exactly as long as it took me to finish the last swallow of coffee. Then I walked to my office and I started reading. The first notification came at 4 in the morning. 17 trade corridors, suspended pending review. I was already at my desk. I had not slept. The Yeth Accords are 432 pages in their original form, plus 9 appendices, plus 14 years of amendment filings. I had read all of it before. I had read all of it again that night, starting from page 1, Appendix 1, the way you reread a map when you know there is a route you overlooked the first time. Priya had gone to sleep at 2. I had told her to. She had argued briefly and then looked at my face and stopped arguing. At 4:47, the Pelhari Collective formally requested advance payment on all outstanding medical technology licensing fees, all 340 years of them. The figure they attached to the request was not a number I looked at for very long. At 5:12, 3 military non-aggression pacts dissolved. No statements, no diplomatic communiques, just timestamps and digital signatures arriving in my inbox 3 minutes apart, clean and final as locks clicking shut. At 5:55, the Conclave Cultural Exchange Program removed Earth from its active roster. The reason given in the formal removal notice was 2 words: reputational contamination. I wrote those 2 words in the margin of my notepad, circled them once, not because I was angry, because they were going to matter later and I wanted them somewhere I could find them. Priya came back at 6:15, hair still wet, carrying 2 cups of something hot from the station commissary. She set one in front of me and looked at the board on my wall, which by that point had 41 notifications pinned to it in chronological order. She did not say anything for a moment. "How many more?" she said finally. 47 subsidiary agreements hang on the HFY Accords as a load-bearing framework. We've lost 19 so far. The rest will follow as the censure ruling propagates through the communication network. The Dominion ensured it propagates fast. By noon, probably 30 more. She sat down. The medical fees alone are in arbitration. Everything is in arbitration. That is what the next 6 months look like, sitting in rooms while other species decide how much our embarrassment costs. She wrapped both hands around her cup. There has to be something, some clause, some mechanism. "Pull the original HFY Accords," I said. "The full document, not the summary. The actual filed text, including the negotiation record from the original drafting sessions." She pulled it up on her tablet, started reading, got to the third appendix and went very still. I watched her read, watched the moment she found it, the slight change in her posture, the way her eyes moved back to the top of the clause, and read it again before she said anything. "Clause 7, she said, subsection 14. "Yes. This allows any signatory to invoke a systemic misconduct review of the filing party if the filing party has used the same censure mechanism more than 3 times against smaller classified signatories within a single century." She looked up. "Has the Dominion." Keep reading. There is a supplementary document attached to that clause, filed with the original Accords 14 years ago by a junior attaché during the pre-ratification drafting sessions. She found it, read it. Went very, very still. "Ma'am," her voice had changed registers. "This language, the specific phrasing of the activation condition, the definition of smaller classified, the record of use requirement, this is precise," I said. "It reads like someone wrote it knowing exactly what it would need to do someday." I did not answer that. "Who filed this?" she said. "The name on the submission record." She stopped, looked at me. I turned back to my notes. "Find me everything the Werk Dominion has ever filed under the censure mechanism," I said. "Every case, every target, going back as far as the archive runs." She was quiet for a moment. I could feel her still looking at me. "You wrote this," she said, 14 years ago. You were, what, 24? A junior attaché on the drafting team, and you put this in the document and nobody reads the full document," I said. "You did." "I always do." She pulled up the Dominion censure history, started reading. I watched the color change in her face as the list loaded, not the pale of shock but something harder, something that looked like the moment a shape you thought was random resolves into a pattern. "There are 19 of them," she said. "Yes. 19 censure motions, all against smaller species, all using the same procedural mechanism, all within," she did the calculation, 91 years. Which is within the century window specified in Clause 7. She set her tablet down on my desk, looked at it, looked at me. "They did this to 19 other species," she said. It was not a question. It was the kind of statement a person makes when they are recalibrating everything they thought they understood about a situation. "They did it to 19 species that nobody was paying close attention to," I said. "Smaller trade partners, younger members, species without the political relationships to push back effectively." I turned a page in my notes. "The Dominion understood that the mechanism only works when the target is alone. They miscalculated with Earth." I picked up my coffee. "They miscalculated with me," I said. She was quiet again. Outside the office window, the station was waking up, lighting cycles shifting, the corridor noise picking up, the galactic feeds starting their morning programming. My face was probably still on them. The vote tally. The word diminished in 6 languages. "What do we do with this?" Priya asked. Not yet, I said. When? I looked at the notification board. 41 collapsed agreements and more arriving. The ash of 11 years of patient diplomatic work, cooling in real time across my screen. We need the 24, I said. The species that voted against the motion. I need to know why, and I need to know it before the Dominion figures out that I am asking. She picked up her tablet again, already pulling the delegate roster, already sorting by the vote record. That is why I keep her. There is a reception tonight, she said. The Dominion is hosting, celebrating the session outcome. I looked at her. We are going, I said. To the Dominion's party. Yes. She processed this for a moment. That is either the most strategically sound thing you have ever said or the most reckless. Those two things, I told her, are not mutually exclusive. I finished the coffee, set the thermos down. The condensation ring it left on the desk surface was still there from the night before, dry now, just the faint ghost of a circle that had held its shape long after the water was gone. I looked at it for a second. Then I got up and went to find the 24. The Dominion's reception was held on the station's upper observation deck, which has a view of the Callan Nebula and a catering arrangement built for species with 17 different atmospheric and dietary requirements. I arrived in the same clothes I had worn to the session. I had considered changing and then decided against it. Let them see that I had not gone home. Let them read into that whatever they liked. The room noticed me the moment I walked in. Not all at once, the way a wave moves, recognition spreading outward from the door in a slow ring. Conversations paused, then resumed slightly quieter, slightly more careful. I have been in diplomatic spaces long enough to tell the difference between a room that is ignoring you and a room that is watching you while pretending not to. This room was watching me the way you watch a structural crack in a wall that you are not sure is moving. I got a drink from the nearest station, something clear and warm that the Morrow serve at social events, mildly sweet, completely harmless, and I started moving through the room. I was not looking for allies, not yet, I was mapping. Every diplomatic reception is a second conversation running underneath the first. The first conversation is what people say. The second is where they stand, who they stand near, how long they stay in one cluster before moving to another. I have been reading second conversations since I was a junior attaché at 22, and I learned that the most important information in any room is never in the words. The Verk delegation was at the center, receiving. Sarath stood with 3 colleagues, accepting formal congratulations from a line of species that stretched to the window. He did not look in my direction. That was itself information. It takes effort to consistently not look at something. I moved to the outer ring of the room. The 24 delegates were not a block. They did not stand together or move together. They were scattered across the reception the way small species always are at Dominion events, present, polite, and careful. But I had their names now. Priya had compiled the list in the hour before the reception, with notes on each species' trade relationships, political history, and prior voting patterns. I found the first one near the atmospheric filtration wall delegate vein of the Suri, a species of 6-limbed, slow-speaking beings whose homeworld sits inside Dominion-controlled trade lanes. Vane was holding a beverage that suited its atmospheric needs and watching the room with the patient attention of a creature that has survived by being underestimated. I stood nearby, not close enough to be obvious, close enough to make eye contact when it happened naturally. It happened after about 90 seconds. Delegate Oren, Vane said. Its translator rendered its voice into a low, even tone. We were not certain you would attend. I was not certain either, I said. Vane's secondary eyes, smaller, set higher, the ones used for peripheral observation, moved briefly to the center of the room where Sarath stood. The Suri have an expression, it said. Loosely translated, The hunter who celebrates loudly has already forgotten to watch the grass. I turned that over. You voted against the motion. The Sci-fi voted according to our assessment of the motion's architecture, Vane said carefully, not its subject. Tell me about the architecture. Vane was quiet for a moment. The room moved and murmured around us, unconcerned. The censure mechanism, it said, has a history. The Dominion has refined it across decades. The precedent structure is thorough. It has been used to reduce trading power, to limit political access, to create the conditions under which smaller signatories find renegotiation the more comfortable option. It paused. The Sci-fi are a small signatory. So you recognize the mechanism. We recognize the shape of it, Vane said. We have seen the shape before. In our own session records 30 years ago, we declined differently then. The Dominion accepted our concessions and the matter closed. It looked at me steadily. We have never fully reopened the corridors that closed in that negotiation. I filed that away. Who else recognized it? Vane gave me 3 names. I spent the next 2 hours moving through the room with my drink in my hand and my face in its diplomatic neutral, the expression that reads as polite attention and contains nothing that a recording could use against me. I found each of the 3 names Vane gave me, and each of them gave me more, and by the end of the reception I had spoken personally with 11 of the 24 opposing delegates. Every single one of them was small. Every single one of them had a story that sounded, in its general outline, like a different version of the same story. The Dominion had used this mechanism before, quietly, consistently, against targets that did not have the standing to respond effectively. The 19 censure motions in the archive were the formal record. Behind each one was a longer history of informal pressure, adjusted terms, renegotiated access. 19 formal cases, probably 3 times that many informal ones, off the record, unarchived, settled before they reached the floor. I found Delegate Thresh near the window, watching the Callan Nebula with the patience of someone for whom cosmic timescales are not a metaphor but a practical reality. Thresh's species, the Eevee, are one of the oldest in the conclave. Their homeworld was gone before Earth had developed writing. They had been in this room, in one form or another, longer than most species had been spacefaring. Thresh is small by any measure, ancient in a way that does not look ancient. The Eevee do not visibly age. They simply accumulate a quality of stillness that younger species sometimes mistake for absence. 3 hands, 4 eyes, a voice that the translator renders as something between spoken word and tonal music. She turned when I approached, looked at me for a long moment before speaking. You drafted Clause 7, she said. Not a question. I was on the drafting team, I said. You wrote the specific language, the activation threshold, the definition criteria. She turned back to the window. I was present at the pre-ratification sessions. I read the full document. I noted the clause at the time and I noted the name attached to the supplementary filing. She paused. You were very young. 24. What made you put it there? I looked at the nebula. Blues and golds, light that had traveled longer than human civilization. The question had a real answer, and I was not going to give it in full, not here, not to someone I had known for 2 hours, not in a room full of species that were still deciding what Earth was worth. I was new to the Accords, I said. I read the full document. I noticed that the censure mechanism had no reciprocal provision. That seemed like an oversight. Thresh was quiet for a moment. It was not an oversight, she said. The Dominion negotiated that absence deliberately. They were patient about it. They spent 4 sessions across 2 years ensuring that no reciprocal provision made it into the final document. I know, I said. And yet, I agreed. She looked at me. Then she reached into the pocket of her outer garment and produced a stone. small, gray, with a smooth surface that came not from water but from decades of handling. She set it on the window ledge between us. "My world has been gone for 300 years," she said. "I have carried this since my ascension to the conclave. It is the last object that originated from our surface." She did not look at it. "I have carried it because weight is honest. It does not let you forget what you are standing for." I looked at the stone. I picked up my thermos. The ring it had left on the desk that morning was still printed in my memory. I set the base of it gently on the window ledge, next to her stone. Neither of us said anything about that. After a while she said, "What are you going to do?" "I am going to file a motion," I said. "Under Clause 7. "Yes." She picked up her stone, put it back in her pocket, looked at me with 4 eyes that had watched species rise and collapse and rise again over 3 centuries. "You will need the archive," she said. "Every formal filing the Dominion has submitted under the censure mechanism. The full record, with dates and subject classifications." "I have it." She nodded slowly. "Then you already know what the count is." 19, I said. "All against smaller classified signatories, all within 91 years. Within the century window." "Yes." Thresh was quiet for a long moment. Around us, the reception continued, glasses and conversations, and the careful social machinery of 100 species managing their relationships in real time. "The Dominion believed this was finished," she said. "That is because they did not read the full document." She looked at me one more time. Something in her expression, not warmth, something older than warmth, something that had survived 300 years of watching and waiting and carrying a stone from a dead world. "Neither did anyone else," she said, "until you." She left shortly after. I stayed until the reception ended, moving through the room, collecting names and comm codes and the particular favor that comes from listening carefully in a room where everyone expects to be ignored. I had the private communication codes of all 24 opposing delegates before midnight. I had the full Dominion censure archive already on my tablet. And I had something else, something I had not expected to find at a celebration hosted by the people who had spent the day reducing Earth to a footnote. I had the specific precedent language that the Dominion had originally filed, 17 years before the Yeth Accords, to establish the legal foundation of the censure mechanism itself. Priya found it in the archive's supplementary records, sent to my tablet at 11:48 with a message that read simply, "Look at the original precedent filing. Author listed as Werk Dominion Legal Division." The precedent language was in Werk formal dialect. I do not need a translator for Werk formal dialect. I read it standing in the corridor outside the reception hall, coat on, thermos in hand, the station going quiet around me as the late cycle dimming brought the light down. I read it twice. The specific construction of the activation clause, the threshold definition, the record of use requirement. It was language I recognized. Because 14 years ago, when I sat in a drafting session at 24 years old and wrote Clause 7, subsection 14, I had not invented the framework from nothing. I had translated it from the Dominion's own precedent filing. I had taken the legal architecture they built to protect themselves, and I had built a door in it that opened from the other side. They had handed me the key without knowing they were doing it. I walked back to my office through the quiet corridor, the thermos warm in my hand, the dead world stone that Thresh had given me in my coat pocket, heavier than it had any right to be for its size. Honest, she had said. Weight is honest. I had 11 days before the next open session. 11 days to build a motion that was procedurally perfect, evidentially complete, and attached to the Dominion's own architecture so firmly that opposing it would require them to dismantle something they had spent decades constructing. I went back to my desk. I started writing. I requested the emergency session on a Tuesday. The conclave's procedural rules allow any full member to request an emergency session under two conditions. The matter must directly implicate the accords, and the filing party must demonstrate that a scheduled session would create material harm through delay. I had 19 prior censure cases on the record as precedent for material harm. The session was granted within 4 hours of filing. The Werk Dominion's legal team sent 3 formal objections to the session request. I had already addressed all 3 in the appendices of the motion document. I sent a courtesy reply noting this, with page references. They did not send a 4th objection. The chamber filled for the second time in 2 weeks with the same 412 species, and the difference this time was the kind of difference you feel before you understand it. A particular quality of attention, the whole room slightly more awake than usual. The way a space feels when everyone in it suspects that something is about to change the shape of their week. I had spent 11 days working. Priya had spent 11 days not sleeping in any medically advisable quantity. Between us, we had built a motion that was 47 pages in its primary document, with 6 appendices, a full historical record, and a supplementary filing that included every one of the Dominion's 19 prior censure cases with dates, subject classifications, and the conclave's own smaller classification designations for each target species. We had also, quietly, shared the historical record with the 24 opposing delegates, who had shared it with their neighbors. I had not asked them to campaign. I had not asked them to coordinate. I had simply given them information and trusted that species who had spent decades watching the same mechanism operate would know what to do with documentation of it. I walked to the podium and I looked at the room. Sareth was in his seat. He was watching me with the focused, contained attention of someone who has realized, sometime in the last 11 days, that they may have miscalculated, and is now engaged in the work of figuring out exactly how. I had prepared remarks. I did not read from them. Earth is not contesting the 19 counts filed by the Werk Dominion, I said. The counts are accurate. The violations occurred. The Dominion's documentation is thorough, and the conclave's ruling stands on the record. I paused to let the room settle into that, because the room had expected a defense and was recalibrating. Earth is filing a countermotion under the full framework of the ETH Accords, including Clause 7, subsection 14, which permits any signatory to invoke a systemic misconduct review of the filing party when specific conditions are met. I pulled up the first display. The conditions are as follows. The filing party must have used the censure mechanism more than 3 times against smaller classified signatories. The uses must have occurred within a single century, and the pattern of use must demonstrate systemic application rather than isolated response to individual violations. Second display. The Werk Dominion has filed 19 censure motions in 91 years. Every target was a smaller classified signatory. Every motion used the same procedural mechanism. Every outcome resulted in a reduction of the target species, trade access, or political standing within the conclave. I let that sit for a moment. The room was very quiet. 19 motions, I said, in 91 years, against species that did not have the standing, the archive access, or the legal framework to respond, until now. I pulled up the third display, the original Dominion precedent filing, 17 years old, the legal architecture they had built and the mirror I had made of it. The activation language in Clause 7 is drawn directly from Werk Dominion legal division precedent, filed 17 years ago. The Dominion built this framework. We are asking the conclave to apply it. Sareth stood. Point of procedure, he said. His voice was level, completely level. The gravel in a drain sound of a person who has practiced not showing the thing they are currently feeling. Recognized, said the session chair. The countermotion relies on a supplementary clause filed by a junior at HFY 14 years ago, which was never subjected to full conclave review and ratification. I had expected this. It was the strongest objection available to him. The supplementary filing was submitted during the pre-ratification drafting period, I said, in full compliance with the process outlined in Accord's Article 3, Section 2. Supplementary filings during that period are incorporated into the ratified document without requiring separate review, provided they are formally logged with the conclave's document registry. This filing was logged on the date of submission. It has been part of the ratified HFY Accords for 14 years. I turned back to the chamber. It has been available to every signatory for 14 years, I said. The full document has always been accessible. Sorath sat down. He raised two more procedural objections. The first challenged the smaller classification designations of 2 of the 19 target species, arguing they had exceeded the threshold at the time of filing. I had Appendix 4 for that, conclave classification records showing both species had been below threshold at the relevant dates. The second objection challenged the century window calculation, arguing the oldest filing fell outside the relevant period by a matter of months. I had Appendix 6 for that. The filing date was recorded in conclave standard time. By conclave standard time, it was inside the window by 11 days. Sorath did not raise a fourth objection. The chamber voted. 311 in favor, 101 opposed. The 101 were the Dominion's direct trade partners. Everyone else, every species that had watched the mechanism operate, every delegate that had received the historical record in the past 11 days, every species that sat in the 4th ring or the 5th or the 6th, and understood what it meant to be a small signatory in a room where the mechanism only moves in one direction, voted in favor of the review. The session chair announced that the Werk Dominion would be subject to a formal systemic misconduct review, to be conducted over 90 days, with all related censure motions suspended pending outcome, including Earth's. I walked back to my seat, sat down, put my thermos on the desk. Priya was in the observer gallery, behind the glass. I could see her from where I sat. She had both hands over her mouth, which is what she does when she is trying not to visibly react in a professional setting and failing at it. I looked at my notes, looked at the thermos. From across the chamber, I felt Sorath's eyes on me. I did not look up. "You planned this," he said. He said it quietly in Werk formal dialect without the translator, knowing I would understand. I did not answer for a moment. "Clause 7 has been in the HFY Accords for 14 years, I said, in the same dialect. It was available to everyone. Nobody reads the full document. Earth did, I said. I picked up my stylus, turned a page. The session closed. 3 weeks after the second session, I was sitting in my office with the window shading down and a cup of coffee gone cold at my elbow, reading the preliminary findings of the Systemic Misconduct Review Panel. The Werk Dominion had requested a bilateral meeting. Formal request, full protocol, the kind that means the other party would like to negotiate terms before those terms are decided for them. I had accepted and scheduled it for the following month. 17 of the 47 suspended trade corridors had been restored. The Pelhari medical licensing fees were in arbitration with a projected resolution timeline of 8 months. The non-aggression pacts were in renegotiation, each one now containing an explicit reference to Clause 7 in the preamble. I had suggested that language. The other parties had accepted it without objection. Priya came in around mid-morning, tablet in hand, looking like someone who had finally slept a full night and was still slightly surprised by the experience. "The feeds are calling you the architect," she said. "The other delegations. It started with the Surai and it has been spreading for about a week. I heard. It is not being used as an insult. I know what it is. She sat down across from me, looked at her tablet, then at me. Does it feel good? I thought about that question for a moment. Not the diplomatic answer, the real one. I thought about a municipal office in a city that no longer exists. I thought about 30 strangers in a waiting room, and a name read aloud into a space where it had no protection. I thought about 24 species that no one was watching, and 19 cases in an archive that no one was reading, and a clause in a document that sat in the ratified accords for 14 years like a door that no one had thought to try. I thought about what it costs to spend your life reading the full document when everyone around you has decided the summary is enough. It feels like work, I said, which is the closest I get. She nodded slowly, set her tablet down. The 3 Surai corridor cases, she said, the informal pressure the Dominion is applying, the trade adjustment notices. I am documenting them. All of it. Every timestamp, every communique, every adjustment notice. I turned a page. Thresh called it a savings account. Priya was quiet for a moment. Are we safe, Earth, I mean? Are we? Is this over? I looked at the window. The shading was down, but light came through at the edges, the particular gold of station mid-morning. The review panel has 90 days, I said. The Dominion's bilateral request is a sign that they would prefer a negotiated outcome to a panel ruling. A negotiated outcome is better for both parties in the short term. I picked up the cold coffee, decided against it, set it back down. In the long term, the Verk Dominion is not going to forget this. They are going to look for other mechanisms, other approaches, other ways to apply pressure that do not trip the Clause 7 threshold. So we keep watching. We keep reading, I said. Every document, every filing, every amendment and supplementary note and archived session record. I turned another page. That is the job. She picked up her tablet, already pulling the new conclave filing queue, already sorting by subject and date and relevance. I pulled the Dead World stone out of my coat pocket and set it on the corner of my desk where I could see it. Honest weight, Thresh had called it. 300 years old, smooth from handling, not from water, from the hands of a person who carried it every day because she understood that some things must be held continuously or they are lost. I had pulled up the next filing, a proposed amendment to the Durin Corridor Access Protocols, submitted jointly by 4 mid-sized species, procedurally routine, when my comm terminal chimed. The EV delegation, Thresh. I opened the message. It was short, 5 lines in EV tonal notation, which does not translate cleanly into any other language but which I can read, because I learned it at 26 in a 6-week intensive program that my supervisor at the time told me was a waste of time. Roughly translated, it said, the conclave has not seen this in 40 years, not the ruling, the reading, you read carefully, keep reading. Then below that, a single line that had no diplomatic function and no political content, and which she had written anyway in the oldest recorded form of EV notation, the kind they used when they still had a world to come home to. The line said, the small ones are watching now. I set the comm down, looked at the stone, looked at the next filing on my screen. Outside the office, the station was running at full morning capacity. The conclave in session, 412 species going about the ordinary business of a civilization that had spent generations learning to apply pressure in the direction of least resistance. They had not, until recently, calculated for the possibility that someone had been reading the full document all along. I picked up my stylus. I started reading. The small ones were watching. That meant the job was not finished. It meant the job had just properly begun.